I'm pregnant, Roberto." The words shattered the silence of Madison Square Garden's private locker room like a knockout punch to the soul. Roberto Langford, undefeated heavyweight champion with fists worth $50 million, stood frozen as his world collapsed around him. Anne pressed the ultrasound photo against his chest with trembling fingers, her dark eyes blazing with joy and terror. 8 weeks. The doctor said everything looks perfect. Our baby Roberto. Our miracle. He stared at the grainy black and white image. Their child, barely the size of his thumb, but already changing everything. Just 40 minutes ago, he'd signed the contract that would make him the richest fighter in history. The catch? Marriage to Harrison Blackwell's Ice Queen daughter Charlotte within 6 months. Roberto's hands shook as he touched the ultrasound photo. He could see the tiny form curled like a question mark, the child they'd created during stolen moments between his training camps and her nursing shifts. Their miracle, conceived on that snowy February night when Anne had whispered promises against his lips. "Say something," Anne whispered, her voice cracking. "Please." Roberto's throat felt like sandpaper. This woman had sacrificed everything, her nursing degree, her family's approval, her dreams, to watch him climb from underground fight clubs to championship gold. She'd held ice to his swollen face after brutal sessions, counted tip money for his protein shakes, and loved him in their cramped apartment like he was already a king. Anne had believed in him when he slept on gym floors and ate 1 meal a day. She'd whispered encouragement during those dark 3 a.m. moments when quitting seemed easier than fighting. "Roberto," Anne's voice trembled with hope and growing fear. "We talked about this, remember? You said when the time came, when we were ready." "That was before," he said, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. "Before what? Before you won the title? Before the money?" Her voice rose, desperation creeping in. "This is our baby, Roberto. Our family, everything we dreamed about." The locker room door exploded open. Harrison Blackwell strode in wearing a $10,000 suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, followed by his daughter Charlotte, a platinum blonde socialite who'd never thrown a punch or worked a day in her pampered life. "Langford!" Blackwell's voice boomed. "Tonight, after you destroy Morrison, we announce the engagement. My Charlotte deserves a champion." His cold eyes swept the room and landed on Anne with barely concealed disgust. "What's this situation?" Roberto's mouth went dry. In Blackwell's presence, the ultrasound photo in Anne's hands suddenly felt like evidence of a crime. Anne's face went white as death. Her eyes darted between Roberto and the newcomers, the ultrasound photo still clutched in her hand like a lifeline to everything she'd thought was real. "Who's this?" Charlotte's lip curled in disgust as she looked Anne up and down, taking in the second-hand dress, the worn shoes, the calloused hands of a woman who knew struggle. "Roberto, darling, you didn't mention you had company." "I'm Anne Johnson," Anne said, finding her voice despite the terror creeping up her spine. "Roberto's girlfriend, the mother of his—" "Girlfriend?" Charlotte's laugh was like breaking glass. "Oh, how precious. Roberto, you really must stop picking up these charity cases." Roberto's heart hammered against his ribs. One word from him could destroy everything Blackwell had promised. The $100 million endorsement deals, the Hollywood movie contracts, the empire that would make him untouchable, the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the private jets, the respect that money could buy. Or he could choose love over money. Choose the woman who'd believed in him when no one else would. Choose the child growing inside her, his child, his blood, his legacy. Blackwell stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only Roberto could hear. "Choose wisely, boy. This moment determines whether you become a king or remain a pauper forever. I've destroyed bigger men than you for far less." Roberto looked at Anne, really looked at her. She stood there clutching their baby's first picture, her eyes full of love and trust and absolute faith that he would choose them, choose their future, choose the family they'd dreamed about in whispered conversations after making love. She had no idea that the man she loved was about to shatter her world into 1,000,000 pieces. Nobody, Roberto heard himself say, the word dropping like a death sentence. She's nobody. Anne stumbled backward as if he'd struck her. The ultrasound photo fluttered to the floor like a dying bird. Roberto. Her voice was barely a whisper. What are you saying? I'm saying we're done. Each word felt like swallowing razor blades. This was just fun, Anne. You knew that. The lies came easier now, each one killing another piece of his soul. You think I'd throw away everything for some waitress? But the baby, our baby, you said you wanted. Handle it. He couldn't look at her, couldn't watch her beautiful face crumble. I've got a championship to defend and a real future to build. Charlotte linked her arm through Roberto's possessively, her diamond engagement ring catching the harsh locker room lights. Come on, darling. We have cameras waiting. She stepped deliberately on the ultrasound photo as they moved toward the door, grinding her heel into the image of Roberto's unborn child. Roberto, please. Anne's voice broke completely. Look at me. Look at what we made together. For one agonizing moment, Roberto's step faltered. The woman he loved, the only woman who'd ever truly seen him, was begging him not to destroy their family. Their child's future hung in the balance of his next choice. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Roberto said without turning around, his voice hollow as a grave. As they walked toward the door, Roberto heard Anne collapse onto the bench behind him, her sobs echoing off the concrete walls like the cries of a dying animal. The sound would haunt him for the rest of his life. Smart choice, boy, Blackwell whispered in Roberto's ear. Love doesn't pay the bills, power does. You just bought yourself an empire. And what did I sell? Roberto asked, though he already knew the answer. Your soul. But trust me, souls are overrated. Money is forever. Roberto didn't turn around. He couldn't, because if he looked back at Anne, beautiful, loyal Anne who'd just told him they'd created a miracle together, he might throw away $50 million and destroy his shot at immortality. But he could hear her behind him, whispering words that would echo in his nightmares. I loved you. God help me, I loved you more than life itself. The crowd's roar shook the walls as they walked toward the tunnel leading to the ring. 70,000 people chanting his name. Television cameras broadcasting his image to millions worldwide. This was his moment of glory. So why did it feel like he was walking to his own execution? In the tunnel, Charlotte pressed her body against his, whispering about their future. The mansion in Beverly Hills, the yacht in Monaco, the children they'd have who would inherit both empires. Children who would never know struggle, never know hunger, never know what it meant to choose between love and survival. Children who would never know they had a half-sister growing up in poverty because their father was too much of a coward to choose love over money. Behind them, Anne's cries grew fainter with each step. But Roberto could still hear her voice calling his name, still hear the desperation and disbelief that the man she'd given everything to could abandon her so completely. Roberto Langford was about to become the richest fighter in boxing history, and he'd just murdered his own soul to do it. The crowd erupted as he stepped into the arena lights, the championship belt gleaming around his waist. Cameras flashed like lightning. Charlotte waved to the crowd like a queen claiming her throne. But all Roberto could hear was Anne's broken voice echoing through his mind. Our baby, Roberto, our miracle, a miracle he'd just abandoned for 30 pieces of silver and a crown that suddenly felt like it was made of thorns. The referee called him to center ring. His opponent Morrison shadowboxed in the opposite corner, throwing combinations that would normally make Roberto analyze weaknesses and plan his attack. Tonight, He could barely focus. The biggest fight of Roberto's career was about to begin. But in the locker room behind him, a woman sat alone with her shattered dreams and the ultrasound photo of a child who would grow up to become his greatest nightmare. Roberto had chosen money over love, fame over family, power over the only woman who'd ever truly seen him. He'd won everything he thought he wanted, and lost the only fight that would ever matter. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the undefeated heavyweight champion of the world, Roberto the Thunder Langford." The crowd's cheers were deafening. Roberto raised his gloves above his head, playing the part of the conquering hero. Flashbulbs exploded like stars. This was the moment every fighter dreamed of, standing at the center of the universe, undefeated and unstoppable. But behind the roar of the crowd, he could still hear Anne's sobs. Behind the blinding lights, he could still see her face crumbling when he called her nobody. The bell rang. The crowd screamed. Roberto threw the first punch of what would become a legendary career built on betrayal. He won the fight in 6 rounds, devastating Morrison with combinations that seemed powered by his own self-hatred. With each punch he landed, he tried to forget Anne's face. With each cheer from the crowd, he tried to drown out her voice calling his name. It didn't work. 18 years later, that betrayal would come home to roost. And when it did, the whole world would watch as the daughter he'd abandoned destroyed everything he'd built with the same ruthless precision he'd shown in abandoning her. Roberto Langford had no idea that his greatest opponent had just been born in the shadow of his greatest victory. But Anne knew. Even through her tears, even through her heartbreak, Anne knew. She pressed the ultrasound photo to her lips, the photo Charlotte had tried to destroy but failed to tear, and whispered a promise that would echo through the years. "He'll pay for this, baby girl. I don't know how, I don't know when, but he's going to pay for what he did to us. You're going to be everything he threw away and more." The crowd's cheers from the arena above sounded like thunder, like the storm that was coming, like justice demanding to be served. Roberto Langford was about to learn that some victories cost everything, and some daughters never forget. Some daughters grow up hungry, some daughters grow up angry, some daughters grow up with their mother's broken heart and their father's killer instinct, and some daughters become champions for all the right reasons, to prove that love is stronger than money, that loyalty matters more than fame, and that the children you abandon have a way of finding you when you least expect it. 18 years from now, Roberto Langford would look across a boxing ring and see his own eyes staring back at him from his daughter's face. And in that moment, he would finally understand the true cost of the choice he'd made in a locker room beneath Madison Square Garden. But tonight, he celebrated his victory with champagne and photographers, while the woman who'd loved him counted her tears and planned a future that would shake the world. The storm was coming. And it had a name. Clarissa. Chapter 2. A Mother's Struggle. The eviction notice was pink, the color of cotton candy and little girls' dreams. How cruel that something so innocent-looking could destroy everything. Anne held the paper with hands that hadn't stopped shaking since she'd watched Roberto marry Charlotte Blackwell on national television. The ceremony had been broadcast live from a cathedral that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. She'd watched through Murphy's electronics window while bouncing 6-month-old Clarissa, her daughter's tiny fingers wrapped around the ultrasound photo Roberto had abandoned. "Mama," 4-year-old Clarissa tugged at Anne's coat, her voice cutting through the nightmare of unpaid bills scattered across their kitchen table. Even at this age, her daughter's dark eyes held Roberto's intensity. The mean man coming back? The mean man was their landlord, Mr. Peterson, who'd been hammering on their door for the past week. 3 months behind on rent meant eviction in this neighborhood. No mercy, no exceptions, no consideration for a single mother working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. "No, baby girl." Anne forced a smile that felt like broken glass cutting her face. Mama's gonna fix this. But how? Her job at Murphy's Diner paid minimum wage plus tips that barely covered diapers. The night shift at the hospital laundry left her hands raw and bleeding from the chemicals. And the weekend cleaning job at the office building meant she saw Claressa awake for maybe 2 hours a day. She'd tried calling Roberto's management company 47 times. They'd stopped taking her calls after the first week. The lawyers had been crystal clear: no proof of paternity meant no claim to his fortune. A DNA test cost $3,000. $3,000 she didn't have to prove what she already knew in her heart. Meanwhile, Roberto's face smiled down at her from every magazine cover in the grocery store checkout line. "Boxing's golden boy lives his dream life," the headline screamed. Photos of him and Charlotte at charity galas, yacht parties, movie premieres. His net worth had climbed to $200 million. $200 million. Anne was splitting a can of beans between herself and her daughter for dinner. "Mama, hungry?" Claressa asked, pushing half her portion toward Anne with chubby fingers that already showed the stubborn determination she'd inherited from her father. "No, baby. You eat it all. Mama already had hers." It was a lie. Anne hadn't eaten a full meal in 4 days, but watching Claressa smile as she devoured the beans, watching her daughter thrive despite everything, made the gnawing hunger in her stomach disappear. The apartment door rattled under heavy fists that sounded like thunder. "Mrs. Johnson, open up right now." "Peterson." Anne's heart hammered as Claressa instinctively moved behind her mother's legs, those fierce dark eyes already learning to recognize danger. "Stay here, baby." Anne opened the door just wide enough to face the red-faced landlord whose breath reeked of cheap beer and cheaper cigarettes. "Time's up," Peterson growled, his bloodshot eyes raking over Anne's body with the entitled hunger of a man who thought poverty made women desperate enough to trade anything for shelter. "You got 1 hour to pack whatever fits in your car, then you're gone." "Please," Anne whispered, hating herself for begging, but willing to swallow any amount of pride for her daughter. "I just need 2 more weeks. I'm getting a second job at the hospital." "Should have thought of that before you spread your legs for some fighter who don't want you." His cruel smile revealed yellow teeth. 1 hour, and if you ain't gone, I'm calling the cops and child services. Pretty little girl like that shouldn't be living with a mother who can't provide. The threat hit Anne like a physical blow. Child services. They could take Claressa away, claim she was an unfit mother because she couldn't afford rent. Her daughter could disappear into the system, become another forgotten statistic. Peterson stomped away, leaving Anne trembling in the doorway with the taste of terror in her mouth. "Mama?" Claressa appeared beside her, those Roberto fierce eyes blazing with an anger that should have been impossible in a 4-year-old. "That man can't talk to you like that." Anne knelt down to her daughter's level, seeing Roberto's stubborn jawline in Claressa's tiny face, the same determination that had made him a champion burning like a flame that could never be extinguished. "Sometimes, baby girl, people think they can push us around because we don't have money, but you know what?" "What, Mama?" "Money don't make you strong, heart makes you strong, and you got the biggest, strongest heart I ever seen." Claressa nodded solemnly, then wrapped her small arms around Anne's neck with a fierceness that took her breath away. "We gonna be okay, Mama. I'm gonna take care of you when I'm big." The promise from a 4-year-old should have been heartbreaking. Instead, something fierce and protective flared in Anne's chest. This child, their child, would never know the weakness her father had shown, never know the cowardice of choosing money over love. "Yes, baby girl, we're gonna be more than okay. We're gonna be unstoppable." 8 years later. "You can't talk to my mama like that." 11-year-old Claressa stepped between Anne and the grocery store manager, small fists clenched, her stance already showing natural fighting instincts. The manager had been humiliating Anne over a bounced check, $23 for milk and bread. doing it loud enough for the whole store to hear, making sure everyone knew the Johnson women were broke and desperate. "Clarissa, get back here," Anne whispered, mortified by the scene but also blazing with pride at her daughter's courage. "No, Mama." Clarissa's voice carried the same steel that would one day echo through boxing arenas. "He's being mean to you, and that ain't right." The manager, a soft, pale man who'd never faced real hardship, looked down at the fierce child with amusement. "Listen, little girl, I ain't little, and my mama works harder than anybody I know. She got 3 jobs and still finds time to help me with homework and make me breakfast every morning and read me stories, even when she's so tired she can barely stand up. So you better show some respect before I make you." The threat from a 10-year-old should have been laughable. But there was something in Clarissa's eyes, a darkness, a promise of violence that made grown men uncomfortable. The manager took an involuntary step backward. Other customers had stopped to stare. Anne felt heat flood her cheeks, but also something else, pride so fierce it made her chest tight. Her daughter was defending her with the same passion Roberto had once fought in the ring, but with something he'd never possessed, loyalty that couldn't be bought. The manager, embarrassed by the scene and the way other customers were now glaring at him, processed their EBT card without another word. Outside the store, Anne knelt beside her daughter, studying the face that grew more like Roberto's every day, the strong jaw, the determined eyes, the stubborn set of her shoulders that said she'd fight the whole world if necessary. "You can't go around threatening grown-ups, baby." "I wasn't threatening, I was promising." Clarissa's eyes blazed with righteous anger that reminded Anne of herself at that age, before life had taught her to be afraid. "Like you taught me. You said never let nobody make you feel small." Anne pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair, Johnson's baby shampoo, the cheap kind, but it smelled like love and determination and everything good in the world. "You're right, baby girl, but you gotta be smart about how you fight. Some battles you win with words, some you win with your fists, and some—" She thought of Roberto, of the choice he'd made 10 years ago, of the empire he'd built on the foundation of their destroyed love. "Some you win by just refusing to quit." Clarissa pulled back to meet her mother's eyes with the directness that made teachers uncomfortable and bullies think twice. "Mama, why don't I got a daddy?" The question Anne had been dreading for 10 years. She could lie, tell Clarissa her father was dead or unknown. But looking into those honest, fierce eyes, Roberto's eyes, she knew her daughter deserved the truth that would shape her into the warrior she was destined to become. "Your daddy is a fighter, baby, a famous one, the most famous fighter in the world." Clarissa's eyes widened. "Really? What's his name?" "Roberto Langford. They call him the Thunder. Why don't he live with us? Why don't he help us?" Anne felt the familiar knife twist in her chest. "Because he made a choice a long time ago to walk away from us. He chose money and fame over his family. Why? Because he was scared. Scared of loving someone more than his money and his fame. Scared of being responsible for people who needed him." Clarissa processed this with the serious expression of a child forced to grow up too fast, her mind already working through the implications. "His loss," she said finally, her voice carrying a coldness that chilled Anne to the bone. "I wouldn't want a daddy who was scared anyway. Scared people are weak." Anne laughed, despite the tears threatening to fall. "That's my girl. That's my champion." They walked home to their latest apartment, a one-bedroom in the worst part of town where gunshots were lullabies and sirens were morning alarms, but it was theirs. Clarissa chattered about her day at school, about the bullies she'd faced down with words and fists, about the A she'd gotten on her math test despite doing homework by candlelight when the power got shut off. That night, as Clarissa slept beside her in their shared bed, the only bed they could afford, Anne stared at the ceiling and made a promise that would echo through the years. Her daughter would never know hunger like she had, never know the helplessness of having no choices. Whatever it took, however many jobs she had to work, however much she had to sacrifice, Clarissa would have every opportunity Roberto's money could have provided, without his help, without his name, with nothing but the love that had never stopped burning in Anne's heart, and the fire that already blazed in their daughter's eyes like a star waiting to explode. Roberto Langford had walked away from his family, but his daughter was about to walk straight toward him, and when she did, the world would tremble. 4 years later. "Mama, I know what I want to be when I grow up." 14-year-old Clarissa stood in their kitchen doorway, her school clothes torn, her knuckles raw and bloody, and a light in her eyes that Anne hadn't seen since Roberto used to talk about his dreams. "What happened to you, baby girl?" "I found it, Mama. I found what I was born to do." Anne's heart stuttered. She'd seen that exact expression on Roberto's face 15 years ago when he'd told her about his first amateur victory. The same fire, the same certainty, the same dangerous passion that had ultimately destroyed everything they'd built together. But this was different. This was her daughter, her Clarissa. And unlike Roberto, this child had been forged in the fires of abandonment and struggle, tempered by a mother's unbreakable love and a hunger that could never be satisfied by anything less than total victory. "Found what?" "Boxing, Mama. I can fight. I mean really fight." The word hit Anne like a punch to the chest. Boxing. The sport that had given her Roberto and then taken him away. The sport that had built their love and then destroyed it. The sport that had made her baby's father a millionaire and left his daughter counting pennies for school lunch. "Baby." "No, Mama. Listen to me." Clarissa's voice carried a conviction that made Anne's blood freeze. "I broke Tommy Martinez's nose today. One punch. And it felt like coming home." Anne stared at her daughter. This fierce, beautiful child who had Roberto's eyes and her own unbreakable spirit, and realized that fate had been preparing for this moment since the night Roberto walked away. Her daughter was about to enter the world that had destroyed their family, and she was going to conquer it completely. The war Roberto had started 18 years ago was about to begin, and he had no idea his greatest enemy had just been born. Chapter 3. The Love That Was 5 Years Earlier, Anne's Memory. The thunderstorm that changed everything started at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. Anne jerked awake to desperate fists pounding on her apartment door, not the angry hammering of bill collectors, but something raw and rhythmic like a dying heartbeat. She wrapped her robe around her nursing scrubs and peered through the peephole. A man stood in the hallway, soaked to the bone, blood trickling from a cut above his left eye. She'd never seen him before, but something about the way he held himself, proud despite being beaten down, made her unlock the door. "Please," he gasped, leaning against the doorframe. "I just need somewhere to clean up. I got jumped outside the gym, and I live 20 blocks from here. I saw your light." Roberto Langford looked nothing like the polished champion he'd become. No designer suits, no entourage, no cameras, just a struggling fighter in torn jeans and a blood-stained tank top, asking for kindness from a stranger. "Oh my God, you're hurt." Anne's nursing instincts kicked in. She pulled him inside, not caring that he was dripping on her clean floor. "I'm fine," he insisted, then promptly swayed on his feet. "Sit." She guided him to her kitchen table, a thrift store find she'd painted sunshine yellow. "Let me look at that cut." As she cleaned his wound, Roberto studied her face in the soft lamplight. Anne was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or expensive clothes. Her dark skin glowed with natural warmth, and her hands were gentle but sure. "You're a nurse?" he asked, wincing as she applied antiseptic. "Nursing student. Final year?" She focused on his cut, trying to ignore how her pulse quickened when his eyes met hers. "This needs stitches." Can't afford a hospital. I can do it, if you trust me. Roberto had never trusted anyone in his life. Growing up in foster care had taught him that people always wanted something. But there was something different about this woman who'd opened her door to a bloody stranger without asking questions. "What's your name?" he asked as she prepared the suture kit. "Ann Johnson." "And you are?" "Roberto. Roberto Langford." "Well, Roberto Langford, this is going to hurt. I can handle pain." She began stitching, and he didn't flinch once. Instead, he told her about the gym where he trained, how he was fighting his way up from nothing, how tonight's beating had come from fighters whose manager he'd refused to bribe. "Why do it?" Anne asked, tying off the final stitch. "Why put yourself through this?" "Because when I'm in that ring, I'm not a throwaway kid nobody wanted. I'm not poor or desperate or forgotten. For those few minutes, I'm everything I was meant to be." Anne's hands stilled on his face. She understood that feeling, the desperate need to prove you were worth something. "There," she whispered, "all done." Roberto reached up and covered her hand with his. His touch was rough from years of training, but it was the gentlest thing Anne had ever felt. "Thank you. Don't mention it." "No, I mean, thank you for seeing me. Not what I might become, not what I'm fighting for. Just me." The rain drummed against the windows as they looked at each other, both knowing that everything had just changed. Roberto should have left then, should have walked back into the storm and continued his solitary climb to the top. Instead, he asked, "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" 3 weeks later, they were inseparable. Anne had never experienced love like Roberto's, complete devotion and wild passion. He treated her like precious treasure, bringing flowers he couldn't afford and staying up all night helping her study for exams. "You're going to be famous someday," Anne whispered one night as they lay intertwined, their skins still glowing from lovemaking that left them breathless. "We're going to be famous," Roberto corrected, pulling her closer. "You think I'm doing this for me? Anne, baby, I'm fighting for us, for the life we're building together." He traced patterns on her bare shoulder, his calloused fingers creating fire wherever they touched. "Tell me," she breathed against his neck. "Tell you what?" "Tell me about our life, the one we're going to build." Roberto's eyes lit up like a child's on Christmas morning. "First thing I'm buying you is a house, not some mansion. I know you don't care about that stuff, but a real house with a garden where you can grow those flowers you love." Anne smiled, pressing kisses to his chest. "What else?" "I'm going to pay for you to finish nursing school, not because you need my money, but because I want to give you choices." "I already have everything I want," she whispered, meeting his eyes. Roberto cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "I love you, Ann Johnson. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Scared of what?" "Scared of losing this. Losing you." Anne silenced his fears with a kiss that tasted like promises and forever. When they broke apart, both were breathless. "You're not losing me, Roberto Langford. You're stuck with me." "Good," he growled, rolling her beneath him. "Because I plan on spending the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me." His father owned 3 businesses and paid for Tommy's training, making him think he owned the gym and everyone in it. "Nothing," she said, backing toward the wall. "Just walking by." "Just walking by?" Tommy sneered, stepping closer until she could smell the protein shake on his breath. "You've been watching for 20 minutes. You some kind of freak? Girls don't belong here, especially broke-ass girls like you." "I can watch if I want to." Tommy stepped closer, his breath hot on her face, his bulk meant to intimidate. "Little ghetto princess thinks she's tough? Your mama ain't here to protect you now. Neither is that deadbeat daddy who don't want you." The words hit Clarissa like physical blows. Tommy knew about her father. Everyone at school whispered about it. The girl with no daddy, the girl whose mother worked 3 jobs just to keep them fed. But then, Claressa looked past him into the gym, where a female fighter was working the heavy bag with devastating precision. The woman moved like liquid violence, her combinations so fast they blurred together, each punch landing with the sound of thunder. "She doesn't belong here either, right?" Claressa said, nodding toward the female fighter. Tommy glanced back and laughed. "Rosa, she's different. She's actually good. Won the state championship 3 times. You're just some wannabe watching through windows like a homeless dog begging for scraps." "How do you know I'm not good?" "Because you're a girl. Because you're poor. Because you don't got what it takes." Tommy shoved her hard enough to slam her back against the brick wall, the impact driving the air from her lungs. "Because you're nothing, just like your daddy thinks you are." The word hit Claressa like a lightning bolt. Nothing. That's what her father had called her mother before he walked away. Nothing. That's what the world had been telling her every day of her life, through empty refrigerators and eviction notices and clothes from Goodwill. Something primal and dangerous uncurled in her chest, like a snake ready to strike. "Don't touch me," she said quietly, her voice carrying a calm that made Tommy's smile falter. Tommy laughed and reached for her again, his meaty hand grabbing for her shoulder. "What you gonna do about it?" "Nothing, girl." Claressa's fist moved before her brain could stop it. The punch came from her toes, up through her legs, rotating her hips and shoulders exactly like she'd seen in the Ali footage. Her knuckles connected with Tommy's nose with a sound like a branch snapping in a hurricane. Blood exploded across his face as he stumbled backward, howling like a wounded animal. "You crazy bitch! You broke my nose!" "And I'll break your jaw if you touch me again," Claressa said, shocked by the calm in her own voice, by how right it felt to watch his blood drip onto the concrete. "I ain't nothing, Tommy. But you're about to be unconscious if you don't walk away." The noise had drawn attention from inside the gym. Fighters gathered in the doorway, including Rosa and Miguel himself. The old trainer's weathered face showed no emotion as he took in the scene. Tommy holding his gushing nose, Claressa standing over him with bloodied knuckles and fire in her eyes. Tommy wiped blood from his face, his eyes blazing with humiliation. "I'm gonna tell my dad. He'll shut this whole place down. And you're gonna pay for this." "You're gonna what?" Miguel's voice cut through Tommy's threat like a blade. The old trainer stepped out of the gym, his eyes moving between Tommy's broken nose and Claressa's perfectly positioned fist. "She jumped me!" Tommy whined, his voice nasal from the damage. "Crazy girl came out of nowhere." Miguel looked at Claressa with the intensity of a judge weighing evidence. "That true, mija?" "He grabbed me," Claressa said simply, meeting the trainer's eyes without flinching. "I don't let nobody grab me, ever." "Show me your hands." Claressa extended her fists. Miguel examined her knuckles, split from the punch, but positioned correctly, her thumb outside her fingers just like the professionals. "You train somewhere?" "No, sir. I watch videos sometimes, study fighters." Miguel's weathered face broke into a slow smile that transformed his entire appearance. "You split his nose with no training? Just instinct and library videos?" "I guess." "Tommy, get to the hospital. Get that nose set." Miguel's tone brooked no argument. "And if I hear you bothered this girl again, you're banned from every gym in the city. Your daddy's money don't mean nothing to me. Entiendes?" Tommy slunk away, muttering curses and holding his nose, leaving a trail of blood drops like breadcrumbs. Miguel turned back to Claressa, studying her with the intensity of a man who'd spent 40 years recognizing raw talent. "What's your name?" "Claressa Johnson." "Well, Claressa Johnson, you just cost me a student. Tommy's daddy pays good money for training." Claressa's heart sank. She'd found the one place that felt like home, and now she'd destroyed her chances of ever belonging there. "I'm sorry, I'm not." Miguel's eyes sparkled with something that looked like Christmas morning. Tommy was soft, had some talent but no heart, no fire. "You?" He gestured to Tommy's blood on the concrete. You got something I can't teach, can't buy, can't fake. What's that? Killer instinct. The thing that separates fighters from people who just know how to fight. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the gym's interior where the other fighters had returned to their training. You want to learn to use it properly. Clarissa looked through the doorway at the world she'd been dreaming of without knowing it existed. The heavy bags swayed from recent punishment. The ring in the center called to her like a church altar. I don't have money for lessons. Who said anything about money? You sweep floors, clean equipment, help me run this place. I'll teach you everything I know. Why? Miguel studied her face, the determination in her dark eyes, the way she stood despite having just been in her first real fight, the hunger that radiated from her like heat from a forge. Because every 20 years or so, someone walks into my gym who's different. Someone with that fire you can't fake, can't buy, can't teach. Rosa was one. He nodded toward the female fighter. Now she's ranked 3rd in the world. And you think I could be like her? Mia, I think you could be better than her. I think you could be better than anyone who's ever stepped through those doors. Clarissa felt something shift in her chest, a door opening onto a future she'd never dared imagine, a path that led from nothing to everything. When do I start? Right now. Grab those gloves. Miguel pointed to a worn pair hanging on the wall. Let's see if that punch was luck or destiny. As Clarissa laced up her first pair of boxing gloves, cracked leather that had shaped a dozen champions, she had no idea that across town, Roberto Langford was on television talking about his upcoming exhibition match. Had no idea that her father's championship belts were displayed in a mansion she'd never seen, while she trained in a gym held together with duct tape and dreams. All she knew was that when Miguel held up the focus mitts and called for combinations, her hands moved like they'd been waiting her entire life for this moment. Left hook, right cross, left uppercut. Each punch landed with devastating precision that made Miguel's eyes widen. Each impact sent shockwaves through her bones that felt like coming home. Dios mío, Miguel susurró después de la tercera combinación. You sure you never trained before? Never. Then God help whoever you fight, mija, because you're going to be a monster. And in the reflection of Miguel's proud smile, Clarissa saw her future rushing toward her like an oncoming train. She was about to become everything her father had abandoned. The only question was whether the boxing world was ready for the storm that had been brewing for 14 years in the heart of a girl who'd been called nothing. They were about to find out. The daughter Roberto Langford had thrown away was about to pick up the gloves that would destroy his world. One punch at a time. Chapter 5. The Hunger Within. Anne knew something had changed the moment Clarissa walked through their apartment door. Her daughter's knuckles were raw, her school clothes torn, and there was a light in her eyes that Anne hadn't seen since Roberto used to talk about his dreams in their old bed. The same dangerous fire that had consumed everything in its path. Baby girl, what happened to you? Clarissa dumped her backpack and faced her mother with the intensity of a warrior reporting for battle. Blood still stained her knuckles, and her breathing was elevated like she'd been running for miles. Mama, I found it. I found what I was born to do. Anne's heart stuttered. She'd seen that exact expression on Roberto's face 15 years ago when he'd told her about his first amateur victory. The same fire, the same certainty, the same dangerous passion that had ultimately destroyed everything they'd built together. Found what? Boxing, Mama. I can fight. I mean really fight. Clarissa's words tumbled out like water through a broken dam. There's this gym, this trainer Miguel, and I broke this boy's nose with one punch. You what? Anne's blood went cold. Boxing, the sport that had given her Roberto, then stolen him away. The sport that had built their love, then destroyed it completely. Mama, you should have seen it. The way my fist connected, the way it felt so right, like I was finally doing what God made me for. Clarissa's eyes blazed with a hunger that terrified Anne to her core. Miguel says I got natural talent, says I could be better than anyone. Anne sank into their second-hand chair, memories crashing over her like a tsunami. Roberto in their tiny apartment, shadowboxing while she studied for nursing exams. Roberto telling her about his dreams, his voice carrying the same obsessive intensity she now heard in their daughter's voice. "Baby, boxing is dangerous. People get hurt." "I'm already hurt, Mama," Clarissa exploded, her voice cracking with emotion. Every day at school, kids talking about their daddies, about family vacations and new clothes and all the things we can't have. Every night watching you work yourself to death just to keep us fed. I'm tired of being hurt by things I can't control. The raw pain in her daughter's voice hit Anne like a physical blow. Clarissa had been carrying this weight for years, and Anne had been too busy surviving to see it. "But in that gym," Clarissa continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, "when I hit that bag, when I threw that punch, for the first time in my life I felt powerful, like I could take all this pain and turn it into something that matters." Anne looked at her daughter, really looked at her. Clarissa stood different now, balanced on the balls of her feet like a fighter. Her shoulders were set with the confidence of someone who'd discovered their purpose. This wasn't just teenage rebellion. This was destiny calling. "Tell me about this trainer." For the next hour, Clarissa described Miguel Santos with the reverence of a disciple describing a prophet. How he'd seen something in her that no one else ever had. How he'd offered to train her for free in exchange for work around the gym. How he'd looked at her like she was already a champion instead of a girl from the projects with holes in her shoes. "He says I got something special, Mama. Something that can't be taught." Anne closed her eyes, remembering Roberto saying almost identical words 15 years ago. But there was something different about Clarissa's hunger, something harder, more focused. Roberto had fought to escape his past. Clarissa wanted to fight to conquer her future. "And this is what you really want? Not just because you're angry?" "I want it more than I've ever wanted anything in my life." Clarissa knelt beside Anne's chair, her voice intense with conviction. "Mama, I know this scares you. I know it reminds you of him. But I'm not my father. I'm not going to abandon people who love me. I'm going to fight for them." Anne studied her daughter's face, Roberto's determined jaw, but her own fierce loyalty. Her father's natural athleticism, but her mother's unbreakable heart. "If you're going to do this," Anne said finally, "you do it right. No half measures. You train hard, you listen to your coach, and you never forget where you came from." Clarissa's face lit up like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "Really? Really? But I got conditions." "Anything. School comes first. Your grades slip, you're done. And you tell me everything, every fight, every injury, every time someone tries to take advantage of you. I promise, Mama. I swear." Anne pulled her daughter into a fierce hug, breathing in the scent of her hair, mixed with the smell of the gym, leather and sweat and dreams. "Then go show the world what a Johnson woman can do." 3 months later. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Clarissa had gained 15 pounds of muscle, her body sculpted by hours of relentless training. She woke up at 5 a.m. to run 5 miles before school, spent every afternoon at the gym, and fell asleep studying fight footage on their ancient laptop. Anne watched her daughter evolve from an angry teenager into something magnificent and terrifying, a predator disguised as a high school student. "Mama, watch this," Clarissa said one evening, demonstrating combinations in their tiny living room. Her hands moved with lightning speed, her footwork making their cramped apartment look like a boxing ring. "Where did you learn that?" "Miguel's been showing me footage of the old masters. Ali, Frazier, Foreman." Clarissa's eyes glowed with fanatical devotion. "But also the women. Layla Ali, Jackie Frazier-Lyde, And Mama ... Her voice dropped to a whisper. He showed me footage of my father. Anne's blood froze. What? Roberto Langford. Miguel didn't know at first, but when I told him my daddy's name, he pulled up old fights. Clarissa's expression was unreadable. I studied every round, every combination, every weakness. Baby, he's good, Mama, real good. But he's got tells, little things he does before he throws his right hand. And he drops his left shoulder when he's tired. Clarissa's smile was cold as winter. I'm learning everything about him, his style, his habits, his weaknesses. Why? Because someday I'm going to face him. And when I do, I'm going to show him exactly what he threw away. The conviction in her daughter's voice sent chills down Anne's spine. This wasn't just about boxing anymore. This was about justice, about proving that the daughter he'd abandoned could rise higher than he'd ever dreamed. 6 months later. You ready for this, mija? Miguel stood in the corner of the amateur ring at the downtown civic center, his weathered hands wrapping Clarissa's wrists with practiced precision. Around them, the crowd buzzed with anticipation for the youth championship semi-finals. Clarissa nodded, her eyes fixed on her opponent across the ring, Maria Santos, the defending champion whose father owned a chain of gyms and had been training her since she was 6 years old. Remember, Miguel whispered, she's got experience, but you got hunger. She's fighting to keep what she has. You're fighting for everything you've never had. Clarissa looked toward the small section where Anne sat, her mother's face tight with worry and pride. Next to her sat Rosa, Miguel's star fighter, who'd driven 3 hours just to watch Clarissa's biggest test yet. I won't let you down, coach. You already made me proud, mija. Now go show them what we've been working for. The bell rang. Maria came out fast, throwing combinations designed to overwhelm an inexperienced opponent. But Clarissa moved like water, slipping punches by inches, making Maria miss by margins so small the crowd gasped. Then Clarissa countered. Her left hook caught Maria flush on the jaw, followed by a right cross that sent the champion staggering backward. The crowd erupted as Clarissa pressed forward, unleashing combinations that she'd practiced 10,000 times in the gym. But it wasn't just technique. There was something primal about the way Clarissa fought, a hunger that transformed every punch into a statement about who she was and where she'd come from. By the 3rd round, Maria was holding on, trying to survive until the final bell. Clarissa stalked her around the ring with the patience of a predator, picking her shots, breaking down the champion piece by piece. With 30 seconds left, Clarissa landed a combination that dropped Maria to one knee. The referee began counting, but Clarissa had already turned away, her eyes finding Anne in the crowd. 10, the referee shouted. Winner by knockout, a new youth champion, Clarissa Johnson. Anne was crying as Clarissa climbed through the ropes and ran to her, championship medal gleaming around her neck. I did it, Mama. I really did it. You sure did, baby girl. You sure did. As they hugged, neither woman noticed the man in the expensive suit watching from the back of the arena. He'd been scouting talent for a major promotion company when he'd heard about the girl who'd destroyed the youth division in less than a year. The man made a note in his phone. Clarissa Johnson, investigate immediately. Potential gold mine. Within 6 months, that note would reach the desk of someone who knew exactly who Clarissa Johnson was, and why her rise through the boxing world should terrify Roberto Langford. But tonight, she was just a 16-year-old girl hugging her mother and holding her first championship medal, unaware that she'd just taken the first step on a path that would lead directly to her father's throne. The war Roberto had started 18 years ago was about to begin in earnest, and his abandoned daughter was ready to show the world that some fires burn hotter when they're forged in abandonment and fed by a mother's unbreakable love. Chapter 6. Rising Through Pain. The newspaper headline screamed across the sports section like a declaration of war. Mystery girl destroys amateur division. Who is Clarissa Johnson? Roberto Langford stared at the article over his morning coffee in his Beverly Hills mansion, his blood turning to ice water as he read every devastating detail. The girl in the photo had familiar eyes, dark, intense, burning with the same fire he'd once seen in his own mirror 20 years ago. The last name was like a sledgehammer to his chest. Johnson, Anne's last name. The article detailed the meteoric rise of 17-year-old Clarissa Johnson, who'd won every amateur tournament she'd entered in the past 2 years, usually by knockout in under 3 rounds. The sports writer gushed about her supernatural instincts and devastating power that seemed to emerge from thin air. But Roberto saw something else in the photo that made his hands shake like an old man's. The way she held herself in the ring, the predatory angle of her shoulders, the cold, calculating determination in her eyes that reminded him of himself at that age, hungry, desperate, willing to destroy anyone who stood between him and greatness. The resemblance wasn't just striking, it was terrifying. "Darling, you look like you've seen a ghost." Charlotte glided into their marble kitchen, wearing a silk robe that cost more than most people's cars. After 18 years of marriage, she'd maintained her ice, queen beauty through expensive procedures and colder discipline. "Just reading about some amateur boxer," Roberto said, folding the newspaper before Charlotte could see it, his voice betraying nothing of the earthquake happening inside his chest. But his hands shook as he set down his coffee cup, and Charlotte's razor-sharp instincts caught the tremor immediately. "You seem unusually interested in amateur boxing all of a sudden." Charlotte's voice carried that surgical edge that had cut down business rivals and social climbers for 2 decades. "Anyone I should know about?" "No one important," Roberto lied, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. But as Charlotte poured herself coffee and began discussing their upcoming charity gala, the one where they'd pretend to care about disadvantaged children while never acknowledging the daughter Roberto had abandoned, his mind raced with mathematical certainty. 17 years old, Anne's last name, the same killer instinct that had made him a champion, the same ruthless precision he'd used to destroy opponents. This wasn't coincidence, this was reckoning, this was the child he'd thrown away, grown strong enough to threaten everything he'd built on that betrayal. Across town, Murphy's diner. Anne burst through the door like a woman possessed, the same newspaper clutched in her hands like a battle flag. Her heart hammered with pride and terror as she searched for Miguel in his usual corner booth. "Did you see this?" she shouted across the diner, not caring that other customers stared at the crazy woman waving a newspaper. "Did you see what our baby girl did?" Miguel looked up from his eggs and fight tapes, his weathered face breaking into a grin that could have powered the entire city. "See what, Hermana?" Anne slammed the newspaper down on the table hard enough to rattle his coffee cup. The headline and photo of Clarissa holding her championship belt filled half the page, her daughter's face radiating the quiet confidence of someone who'd never tasted defeat. "About damn time someone noticed what we've been building," Miguel said, his voice thick with emotion. "That girl is special, Anne. More special than anything I've seen in 40 years of training fighters. They're calling her a phenomenon, a once-in-a-generation talent." Anne's voice trembled with pride and the dawning realization of what this might mean. "Miguel, what if he sees this? What if Roberto? What if what? What if he realizes he threw away the greatest fighter who ever lived?" Miguel's eyes blazed with the fierce protectiveness of a man who'd watched Clarissa grow from an angry teenager into a devastating force of nature. "That girl has been carrying rage for 17 years. Now she's finally found a way to turn it into pure destruction." Anne sank into the booth across from him, her emotions warring between maternal pride and the terror of what might come next. "I'm scared, Miguel. What if she gets hurt? What if she becomes obsessed with revenge and loses herself? What if she becomes like her father? Miguel finished, reaching across to squeeze Anne's hand. Listen to me, Hermana. That girl has been in my gym every single day for 3 years. She helps other fighters when they're struggling. She encourages the young ones when they want to quit. She never complains when I make her clean equipment or run errands for pocket change. She's got her father's talent but your heart. That combination, that's what makes her so dangerous to anyone who tries to stop her. But what if Roberto finds out about this article? What if he comes after her? Miguel's smile turned predatory, dangerous. Hermana, let him come. That girl's been waiting her whole life for a chance to show her father what he threw away. And when that day comes... He gestured to the newspaper photo of Claressa, victorious and unbroken. Roberto Langford is going to learn that some storms destroy everything in their path. Meanwhile, Roberto's private sanctuary. Roberto locked himself in his private gym and pulled up footage of Claressa's fights on his tablet, each video confirming his worst fears and greatest amazement. He'd been secretly following her career for months, unable to look away from the train wreck he'd created. The girl moved like him. Same footwork, same instinctive head movement, same ability to time opponents and exploit their weaknesses with surgical precision. But there was something else, something harder and more focused than his fighting had ever been. She fought like someone with nothing to lose and everything to prove. She fought like someone who'd been abandoned and had turned that abandonment into weapons. She fought like his daughter. His phone buzzed with a text from his manager. Saw the article about that Johnson girl. Want me to look into her? Could be good for your exhibition tour. Might even generate some publicity if we can get her on your undercard. Roberto stared at the message for 20 minutes, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. One word from him could bring Claressa into his orbit. He could arrange for her to fight on his undercard, maybe even offer to train her. He could try to be the father he'd never been, the man he'd abandoned when he chose Charlotte's money over Anne's love. But that would mean admitting the truth. It would mean acknowledging what he'd done. It would mean risking everything he'd built on the foundation of his betrayal. Roberto deleted the message without responding, but the guilt ate at him like acid. 6 months later, the professional debut. The crowd at the downtown arena crackled with electric anticipation as Claressa stepped through the ropes for her professional debut. The local boxing commission had fast-tracked her license after her amateur dominance, and tonight she would face her first paid opponent. Anne sat ringside, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were bone white. Beside her, Rosa had driven 3 hours just to witness this historic moment. "You nervous, Mama?" Rosa asked, studying Anne's tense face. "Terrified," Anne admitted, her voice barely audible over the crowd noise. "She's my baby girl, and she's about to fight a woman who's trying to take her head off for money." "Your baby girl is about to make history," Rosa said, with the quiet confidence of someone who'd sparred with Claressa for 2 years. "Trust me, I've seen her destroy grown men in the gym. She's more than ready for this." In the ring, Claressa faced Tanya Rodriguez, a 8-2 veteran specifically brought in to humble the hyped amateur. Rodriguez had knocked out her last 4 opponents and wasn't impressed by newspaper headlines or teenage phenoms. "You ready, mija?" Miguel asked as he applied Vaseline to Claressa's face with the reverence of a priest preparing communion. "I've been ready my whole life, coach." The bell rang like a gunshot. Rodriguez came out swinging like a woman possessed, trying to intimidate the teenage professional with veteran aggression and every dirty trick she'd learned in 8 years of professional fighting. She threw illegal kidney shots, held and hit, stepped on Claressa's feet, and did everything possible to break the young fighter's composure. But Claressa moved like smoke-given form, making Rodriguez miss by fractions while landing sharp counters that echoed through the arena like thunderclaps. Every punch Claressa threw was calculated, precise, designed for maximum damage and psychological warfare. "This is absolutely unbelievable," the television announcer screamed. "Johnson is making Rodriguez look like she's fighting underwater. The precision, the patience, the ring IQ. This girl fights like she's been doing this for 20 years. By the second round, Rodriguez was already breathing hard, her confidence shattered by a teenager who fought like a seasoned assassin. Claressa had systematically broken down every aspect of the veteran's game, neutralized her power, frustrated her aggression, and made her look foolish in front of the television cameras. "I don't understand what I'm seeing," Rodriguez's trainer told her between rounds, panic creeping into his voice. "She's reading everything you do before you even think about doing it." In the third round, Claressa ended it with surgical precision that left the crowd stunned. A perfect combination that belonged in a boxing textbook. Left hook to the body that folded Rodriguez in half like a closing book, followed by a right uppercut to the chin that sent her crashing to the canvas like a fallen tree. The referee didn't even need to count. Rodriguez was unconscious before she hit the mat. Winner by knockout in her professional debut, Claressa "Lightning" Johnson. Anne was sobbing as Claressa found her in the crowd, tears of pride and terror streaming down her face. "I'm so proud of you, baby girl. We did it, Mama. This is just the beginning of everything we dreamed about." As photographers snapped pictures and reporters shouted questions, Claressa looked directly into the main television camera and spoke words that would haunt Roberto Langford for months. "This victory is dedicated to every child who's been abandoned by a parent who chose money over love. We don't need their names or their money or their approval. We just need the fire they left burning inside us when they walked away." 1 year later, the unstoppable rise. Claressa's professional record climbed to 11-0 with 9 knockouts, each victory more impressive and terrifying than the last. Each opponent was more experienced, more dangerous, more desperate to be the one who finally stopped the teenage phenomenon. None of them came close. Boxing magazines started calling her the future of women's boxing. ESPN featured her on their Rising Stars special. Sports Illustrated put her on their cover with the headline, "The Girl Who Fights Like Thunder." And Roberto watched every single fight in the privacy of his home gym, torn between fatherly pride and existential terror. The phone call that shattered his carefully constructed denial came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, jolting him from nightmares about ultrasound photos and broken promises. "Roberto Langford. Who the hell is this?" "Marcus Webb from ESPN. I'm working on a feature about rising boxing stars, and I wanted to ask you about Claressa Johnson." Roberto's blood turned to Arctic water. "I don't know any Claressa Johnson." "Really?" Webb's voice carried the excitement of a reporter who'd stumbled onto the story of the decade. "Because our research shows some very interesting connections. Same city where you started your career. Her mother's name is Anne Johnson, and Mr. Langford, when you watch her fight." Webb paused for dramatic effect. "She moves exactly like you did at that age. Same style, same instincts, same killer precision." "I have no comment." "She's been telling reporters that she's going to call you out publicly after her next fight. Says she wants to prove that abandoned children can become champions too. Any response to that?" Roberto hung up without another word, but his hands shook for an hour afterward. Charlotte found him at dawn, staring at his championship belts displayed on the wall like trophies from a war he was starting to realize he'd lost the moment he walked away from Anne. Who was on the phone at 3 a.m.? Wrong number. But Roberto didn't sleep for the rest of the week. Instead, he watched every video of Claressa's fights he could find, seeing his own genetics wielded by someone who had every reason to hate him and every tool necessary to destroy everything he'd built. The call-out that changed everything. 2 weeks later, Claressa stood in the ring after demolishing her 12th professional opponent in 4 brutal rounds. The interviewer approached with barely contained excitement as cameras rolled live on national television. "Claressa, you're now 12-0 with 10 knockouts. You're being called the most dominant young fighter in boxing history. What's next for Claressa Johnson?" Claressa looked directly into the camera, her eyes blazing with the cold fire of someone who'd waited her entire life for this moment. "I want to call out Roberto Langford. He calls himself the Thunder, but I got news for him. I'm the storm he created when he walked away from his family 18 years ago." The crowd erupted like a volcano. The interviewer's eyes went wide with shock. Social media exploded within seconds as the clip began trending worldwide. "Are you saying Roberto Langford is your father?" "I'm saying Roberto Langford abandoned a pregnant woman because he was too much of a coward to choose love over money. He threw away his family for a paycheck and a trophy wife. Now his daughter has grown up, and I'm coming for everything he built on that betrayal." The interview went viral within minutes. Sports shows interrupted regular programming to play the clip. Social media exploded with speculation, demands for DNA tests, and calls for Roberto to respond. Langford vs. Johnson began trending worldwide within an hour. In his mansion, Roberto watched the clip for the 100th time, studying the face that looked so much like his own, twisted with righteous anger and unbreakable determination. Charlotte found him in his study at dawn, empty whiskey bottles scattered around his chair like spent ammunition. "So it's true," she said with ice-cold calculation. "You have a daughter." Roberto looked up at his wife, the woman he'd chosen over Anne, over love, over everything that had ever mattered. It was a long time ago. "Not long enough, apparently. She's going to destroy everything we've built unless we act fast." Charlotte's voice carried the calculating coldness of someone already planning damage control. "I have lawyers, investigators, people who can make problems disappear." Roberto thought about Anne, about the ultrasound photo, about the choice he'd made in a locker room that had haunted every single day of the past 18 years. "Maybe," he said quietly, his voice hollow as a grave, "maybe I deserve to be destroyed." But even as he said it, Roberto knew he wouldn't go down without a fight. His daughter wanted war. She was about to get the fight of her life. The collision between father and daughter was inevitable now. The only question was whether Roberto's empire could survive the storm he'd created by abandoning the one person who could have made him truly great. Claressa Johnson was coming for her father, and she was bringing 18 years of abandonment, pain, and her mother's unbreakable love as weapons that would cut deeper than any punch ever could. The final battle was about to begin, and the whole world would be watching when the daughter Roberto threw away came to collect everything he owed her. Chapter 7. The challenge issued. The media explosion was unprecedented. Within 6 hours of Claressa's call-out, number Langford versus Johnson dominated worldwide trending. Sports commentators debated the ethics of father fighting daughter. Boxing commissions scrambled to understand legal implications. Social media erupted with theories and demands for Roberto's response. But Roberto Langford had vanished. "Where the hell is he?" screamed Richard Blackwell, Harrison's son who now managed Roberto's career. "Every news outlet in the world is calling, and our biggest asset is hiding like a coward." Charlotte sat across from Richard in the mansion's marble-floored conference room, her face carved from ice. "He's processing. This isn't just business for him. It better become business fast. We've got $300 million in endorsements that depend on Roberto's reputation. If he looks weak—" "He won't look weak," Charlotte interrupted. "Roberto will fight her. He has to." Meanwhile, at Rosario's gym. The tiny gym had been invaded by reporters, photographers, and camera crews from around the world. Miguel stood guard at the door like a bouncer, allowing only a select few inside to witness Claressa's training. "How does it feel to have called out your own father?" shouted a reporter from ESPN. Claressa didn't break rhythm on the heavy bag. Left hook, right cross, left uppercut. Each combination landed with thunderous precision. "It feels like justice," she said between punches, "for my mother, for every child who's been abandoned by a parent who chose money over family." "But he's Roberto Langford, a living legend. Aren't you intimidated?" Claressa stopped hitting the bag and turned to face the cameras, sweat gleaming on her face like war paint. "Legends are just stories people tell. I'm about to write a new one." The reporters scribbled frantically. This 17-year-old girl spoke with the confidence of someone who'd already won the fight. Anne watched from the corner, her heart torn between pride and terror. Her daughter was magnificent, strong, fearless, unbreakable, but she was also walking into a battle that could destroy her. "You sure about this, baby girl?" Anne asked when the cameras finally left. "Mama, I've been sure about this since I was 4 years old, and you told me my daddy chose money over us." Claressa's eyes blazed with cold fire. "I'm going to show him, and the whole world, what he threw away." Roberto's response. 3 days later, Roberto finally emerged from hiding. The press conference was held at the Beverly Hills Hotel, with Roberto flanked by his management team and lawyers. He looked older, haunted, but still carried himself with the bearing of a champion. "I want to address the recent claims made by Claressa Johnson," Roberto began, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "While I cannot comment on personal matters from many years ago, I will say this. If Ms. Johnson wants to make a name for herself by challenging me, then she'll get her opportunity." The room erupted with questions. "Are you confirming she's your daughter? Will you actually fight her? What do you say to critics who call this a publicity stunt?" Roberto raised his hand for silence. "My team is in talks with the Nevada State Athletic Commission. If they sanction the fight, and if Ms. Johnson can prove she belongs in the ring with me, then we'll settle this matter where it should be settled, between the ropes." Richard Blackwell leaned into the microphone. "The fight will be for Roberto's WBC heavyweight title. Winner takes all. The date will be announced within the week." As Roberto left the podium, one reporter shouted a question that stopped him cold. "Mr. Langford, what would you say to your daughter if she really is your child?" Roberto turned back, his face a mask of pain and pride. I'd say she better be ready for the fight of her life." The announcement. 1 week later, the boxing world received the news that would define the sport for generations. Roberto the Thunder, Langford versus Claressa Lightning Johnson. For the WBC Heavyweight Championship, MGM Grand Garden Arena, Las Vegas. Pay-per-view, December 15th. The announcement sent shockwaves through every corner of the sports world. Father versus daughter. Legend versus rising star. The ultimate family drama played out on boxing's biggest stage, Anne's plea. That night, Anne knocked on the door of Roberto's Beverly Hills mansion for the first time in 18 years. Charlotte answered, her face twisting with disgust. "What do you want?" "I want to talk to Roberto about our daughter." "Your daughter?" "He never claimed her." "Let me in, Charlotte, or I'll camp on your doorstep until every reporter in the city knows where Roberto lives." 5 minutes later, Anne sat across from Roberto in his study, the same room where he kept his championship belts. 18 years had changed them both, him into something harder and colder, her into something fiercer and more determined. "She's going to get hurt," Anne said without preamble. "You're twice her size, Roberto. You could kill her." Roberto's voice was barely a whisper. "Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I wanted this?" "Then call it off. Admit she's your daughter and walk away." "I can't." Roberto's hand shook as he poured himself a drink. "If I admit she's mine, Charlotte leaves and takes half of everything. If I don't fight her, I look like a coward and lose my endorsements. And if I do fight her, you might destroy the only good thing that came from what we had." They sat in silence, the weight of 18 years pressing down between them. She's beautiful, Roberto, strong and smart, and everything we dreamed our child would be. She could have been Daddy's little girl, going to private schools and wanting for nothing. Instead, she hates me. She doesn't hate you. She hates what you chose over her." Anne leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "You can still choose differently. You can still be her father instead of her opponent." Roberto looked at Anne, the woman he'd loved more than life itself, the woman he'd destroyed for money and power, and felt something break inside his chest. "It's too late, Anne. The contracts are signed. The world is watching. There's no way back from this." Anne stood up, her voice cutting through him like a blade. "Then you better pray she forgives you after she beats you, because that girl is going to destroy everything you built on our love, and she's going to do it with a smile on her face." As Anne left, Roberto called after her, "Why didn't you ever ask me for money? For help?" Anne turned back, her face a mask of quiet dignity. "Because I wanted our daughter to earn everything she got. I wanted her to be strong enough to stand on her own when the time came to face you." "And is she?" "Roberto, you're about to find out that the daughter you abandoned is twice the fighter you ever were, and she's got something you never had." "What's that?" "Nothing left to lose." Training camps. As news of the fight spread, both fighters retreated to their training camps. Roberto trained in a state-of-the-art facility in Big Bear, surrounded by world-class trainers, nutritionists, and sparring partners. Every advantage money could buy. Clarissa trained in the same run-down gym where she'd learned to fight, surrounded by people who loved her not for what she could earn them, but for who she was. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. The final stare-down. 6 weeks before the fight, they met for the official press conference and weigh-in ceremony. The MGM Grand was packed with media from around the world. When Clarissa walked onto the stage, the crowd erupted. She wore simple black training gear, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, her eyes focused like laser beams. Roberto followed, still impressive at 41, his body sculpted by decades of professional training, but something in his eyes looked uncertain, haunted. They stood face to face for the traditional stare-down. Father and daughter, abandoned child and abandoning parent, the past confronting its consequences. "Any words for your opponent?" a reporter shouted. Clarissa never broke eye contact with Roberto as she spoke into the microphone. "I don't need his name, his money, or his legacy. I just need 5 rounds to show him what he threw away." Roberto stared into eyes that were mirrors of his own, filled with a hunger and determination that reminded him of himself at her age. "And what do you say to that, Mr. Langford?" Roberto's voice was barely audible above the crowd noise. "I say, I'm proud of the woman she's become, but pride won't save her in that ring." As they separated, neither fighter looked back. The die was cast. The battle lines were drawn. The greatest fight in boxing history was 6 weeks away. Roberto Langford was about to learn that some storms destroy everything in their path, and Clarissa Johnson was about to prove that daughters remember everything their fathers forget. Chapter 8. Preparing for War. 6 weeks before the fight, Roberto's training camp. The punching bag exploded under Roberto's assault, sand spilling across the pristine floor of his private training facility. His sparring partners lay scattered around the gym, 3 heavyweight contenders who'd thought they could give the aging champion a decent workout. They'd all been wrong. "Jesus Christ, Roberto," gasped Tony Marquez, a former title contender now sporting a broken nose. "You trying to kill us?" Roberto said nothing. He'd been training with possessed fury for 3 weeks, pushing his 41-year-old body harder than he had in a decade. Every combination carried devastating intent. Every sparring session ended with someone getting hurt. "Boss," called his trainer, Eddie Castellanos, from across the gym, "you need to dial it back. You're going to burn out before the fight." "I'm fine," Roberto growled, wrapping his hands for another round on the heavy bag. But he wasn't fine. Every night he dreamed of Anne's broken voice in that locker room 18 years ago. Every morning he woke up to pictures of Claressa on the sports pages, her eyes blazing with the same determination he'd once possessed. His daughter had become everything he'd abandoned her to prevent. Meanwhile, at Rosario's gym, Claressa moved through her training routine with the mechanical precision of a master craftsman. 6 rounds on the heavy bag, followed by 5 rounds of speed bag work, then an hour of technical drilling with Miguel. "Your combinations are getting too predictable, mija," Miguel called out as Claressa finished a series of left hook-right cross sequences. "He's going to time them." "Let him try." Claressa's voice was cold as winter. "I got 37 different combinations mapped out, each one designed to exploit a weakness in his style." Miguel raised an eyebrow. For 6 weeks, Claressa had been studying Roberto's fights with the obsession of a forensic scientist. She'd memorized every pattern, every tell, every habit that 41 years of life had drilled into his fighting DNA. "You can't just rely on preparation, Claressa. In that ring, anything can happen." "Nothing's going to happen that I haven't already planned for." Rosa, who'd been holding focus mitts, dropped her hands and stared at Claressa with concern. "Hermana, you're scaring me. This isn't just about boxing anymore, is it?" Claressa's eyes blazed with something that went beyond anger, beyond revenge. "This is about proving that love is stronger than money, that loyalty matters more than fame, that the children people throw away have a way of coming back to collect what's owed." The revelation. 3 weeks before the fight, Roberto's worst nightmare came true. He was reviewing fight footage in his study when Eddie burst through the door, his face white with panic. "Boss, we got a problem. A big fucking problem." "What now?" Eddie threw a folder onto Roberto's desk. "DNA test results. Someone leaked them to TMZ." Roberto's blood turned to ice water as he read the lab report. 99.97% probability of paternity. Scientific proof of what his heart had known the moment he saw Claressa's eyes in that newspaper photo. "How did they get my DNA?" "Coffee cup from the press conference. They tested it against a hair sample from the gym where she trains." Roberto's hands shook as he set down the papers. The secret he'd protected for 18 years was now front-page news across the world. His phone immediately started ringing. Richard Blackwell's name flashed on the screen. "You better have an explanation." Richard's voice was ice-cold fury. "Because my father is talking about pulling all sponsorship deals." "It changes nothing," Roberto said. "The fight goes on as scheduled." "It changes everything. You're about to fight your own daughter on pay-per-view. Do you have any idea what this looks like?" "It looks like justice," Roberto said quietly, surprising himself. Charlotte's ultimatum. That night, Charlotte cornered Roberto in their bedroom, her face a mask of cold calculation. "I want her eliminated," she said without preamble. "What?" "Not killed, you idiot. Discredited, destroyed. I've hired investigators to dig up every piece of dirt on that little ghetto princess and her crack-whore mother." Roberto grabbed Charlotte by the shoulders, his eyes blazing with fury. "Don't you ever talk about Anne like that again. Oh, please. You threw that woman away like garbage 18 years ago. Don't develop a conscience now." "Things change." "Not for me. Either you destroy that girl in the ring, or I destroy her outside of it. Your choice." Roberto looked at his wife, the woman he'd chosen over love, over family, over everything that mattered, and realized he was staring at a stranger. Had she always been this cold, this calculating, or had 18 years of living with his guilt turned them both into monsters? Claressa's preparation. While Roberto's world imploded around him, Claressa trained with the focus of a surgeon, preparing for the most delicate operation of her career. She sparred with male heavyweights twice her size, absorbing punishment that would have hospitalized most fighters. She studied Roberto's old fights until she could predict his movements before he made them. She trained with fractured ribs, a torn shoulder, and hands so damaged that Miguel had to inject them with painkillers before each session. "You're going to kill yourself before you even get in the ring," Anne pleaded after finding Claressa collapsed in the gym bathroom, vomiting from exhaustion. "Better to die preparing than to live knowing I wasn't ready," Claressa gasped. "Baby girl, this isn't about proving anything anymore. The whole world knows you're his daughter. You've already won." Claressa looked up at her mother with eyes that burned like stars. "I haven't won until he admits what he did, until he says my name, until he acknowledges that he threw away the best thing he ever had." The mind games. 2 weeks before the fight, Roberto's team tried to get inside Claressa's head. They leaked stories about Roberto's training intensity, about sparring partners being hospitalized, about his devastating punching power. They planted articles questioning whether a 17-year-old girl belonged in the ring with a heavyweight champion. Claressa's response was to post a video on social media. She stood in front of the heavy bag in Miguel's gym, wearing simple workout gear, her face calm as stone. "They want to talk about my father's power, about his experience, about how I'm just a little girl who doesn't belong." She turned to the heavy bag and unleashed a combination that sent shockwaves through the building. Left hook, right cross, left uppercut, right overhand. Each punch landed with the sound of thunder. The heavy bag, a 200-pound professional model, tore completely off its chain and crashed into the wall. Claressa turned back to the camera, not even breathing hard. December 15th. Roberto Langford is going to learn that power isn't about size. It's about having nothing left to lose. The video went viral within hours. Roberto's breaking point. 1 week before the fight, Roberto couldn't take it anymore. He drove to Anne's apartment at 2 a.m., sitting outside in his Bentley for an hour before finally knocking on her door. Anne answered in her robe, unsurprised to see him. "I can't do this," Roberto said, his voice breaking. "I can't fight my own daughter." "Then don't. You don't understand. If I pull out now, I lose everything. The endorsements, the money, my legacy." "You lost everything 18 years ago when you chose money over love," Anne said quietly. "This is just the bill coming due." Roberto looked at the woman he'd destroyed, the woman who'd raised their daughter to be everything he'd failed to become. "Tell me how to fix this. Tell me how to be her father instead of her enemy." "You can't, Roberto. That chance died in a locker room when you called me nobody. The only thing you can do now is give her what she needs." "What's that?" "The chance to beat you. The chance to prove that the daughter you abandoned became stronger than the father who walked away." Roberto stared at Anne for a long moment, seeing the woman he'd loved reflected in their daughter's fierce determination. "She's going to destroy me, isn't she?" "Completely," Anne said with quiet satisfaction. "And Roberto. She's going to enjoy every second of it." Final preparations. With 3 days left before the fight, both camps made their final preparations. Roberto trained alone, hitting bags with mechanical precision while his team whispered about backup plans and damage control. Claressa surrounded herself with the people who'd believed in her from the beginning: Miguel, Rosa, Anne, and the fighters from the gym who'd become her family. "Remember, mija," Miguel said as he wrapped her hands for the last training session. "He's bigger, stronger, more experienced, but you got something he lost a long time ago." "What's that, coach?" "The hunger, the fire, the thing that makes champions out of throwaway kids." Claressa nodded, her eyes already focused on the battle that would define both their lives. "I'm ready." But as she said it, Claressa had no idea that Roberto had already made a decision that would change everything. In 3 days, father and daughter would face each other across a boxing ring. Only one of them would emerge as champion. But both of them would finally learn the true cost of the choice Roberto had made 18 years ago in a locker room beneath Madison Square Garden. The war was about to begin. Chapter 9. The Night Before Battle. December 14th, 11:47 p.m., MGM Grand Hotel. Las Vegas pulsed with electric anticipation. Every sports bar, casino, and hotel lobby buzzed with conversations about tomorrow's fight. Betting lines had shifted 17 times in the past week. Pay-per-view pre-orders had shattered every boxing record. Father versus daughter. Legend versus rising storm. The most anticipated fight in the history of combat sports was less than 13 hours away. Roberto's penthouse suite. Roberto stood on his balcony overlooking the Strip, the neon lights painting his face in alternating shades of red and gold. Below him, the city that had made him rich, sparkled like scattered diamonds. Tomorrow, it might witness his destruction. His hands, the same hands that had earned him $200 million, trembled as he gripped the railing. In his mind, he replayed every moment that had led to this nightmare. Anne's broken voice in that locker room. Claressa's cold stare at the press conference. 18 years of choices that had seemed so right at the time. Having second thoughts? Roberto turned to find Charlotte in the doorway, her silk nightgown catching the city lights. Even now, on the eve of the most important fight of his life, she looked like she was posing for a magazine cover. "How can you be so calm?" Roberto asked. "Because tomorrow, one way or another, this ends. Either you destroy that little girl and we move on with our lives, or she destroys you and I take half of everything in the divorce." Roberto stared at his wife, the woman he'd chosen over love, and realized he was looking at a stranger. "Is that all this is to you? A business transaction? What else would it be? Love?" Charlotte laughed, the sound like breaking crystal. "Roberto, we stopped pretending this was about love 15 years ago. This is about money, power, and protecting what we've built. And if I lose? You won't. You're Roberto Langford. She's just an angry child with daddy issues." But even as Charlotte said it, Roberto heard the uncertainty in her voice. They'd both seen the footage of Claressa's training. They'd both seen the cold determination in her eyes. Tomorrow wasn't going to be a fight, it was going to be an execution. The only question was, who would die? 3 floors below, Anne's hotel room. Anne sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the ultrasound photo she'd carried for 18 years. The edges were worn from handling, the image faded but still clear enough to see the tiny form that had grown into the most dangerous fighter on the planet. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in, baby girl." Claressa entered wearing simple pajamas, her hair loose around her shoulders. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to crawl into Anne's bed during thunderstorms. "Can't sleep either. Too much energy." Claressa sat beside her mother, both women staring at the photo that had started everything. "Mama, what if—" "No what ifs. Not tonight." Anne wrapped her arm around her daughter. "Tomorrow you walk into that ring as everything you were meant to be. Everything I raised you to be. Everything he threw away." "I'm scared, Mama." Anne's heart broke a little. Despite everything, the training, the victories, the fierce determination, Claressa was still her 17-year-old daughter. Scared of losing, scared of winning, scared of what happens after I prove I'm better than him. Claressa's voice was barely a whisper. What if it doesn't make the pain go away? What if beating him doesn't fix what's broken inside me? Anne pulled her daughter closer, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Baby girl, this fight isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about proving that what's broken can still be beautiful, that abandoned children can become champions, that love is stronger than money. And if I lose? You won't, but if you did, you'd still be my champion. You'd still be the most extraordinary person I've ever known." They sat in silence, mother and daughter, warrior and guardian angel, drawing strength from each other on the eve of battle. Across town, Miguel's hotel room. Miguel couldn't sleep either. He'd trained champions for 40 years, but none of them had carried the weight Claressa bore into tomorrow's fight. His phone buzzed. A text from Rosa. "Can't sleep. Thinking about tomorrow." Miguel typed back, "She's ready, more ready than anyone I've ever trained." But is she ready for what comes after? Win or lose, her life changes forever tomorrow. Miguel stared at the message for a long time before responding. That girl has been ready for this fight since the day she was born. Tomorrow, she becomes who she was always meant to be. 2:17 a.m. Roberto's private gym. Unable to sleep, Roberto found himself in the hotel's private training facility, hitting the heavy bag with mechanical precision. Each punch was perfect, technically flawless combinations that had destroyed a generation of heavyweights. But something was missing. The fire, the hunger, the thing that had once made him unstoppable. "You're up late." Roberto spun around to find Anne standing in the doorway. She looked older than her 36 years, worn down by 18 years of struggling alone. But her eyes still held the strength that had first attracted him all those years ago. "Shouldn't you be with her? Making sure she's ready?" "She's ready. Question is, are you?" Roberto unwrapped his hands slowly, buying time he didn't have. "Why are you here, Anne?" "To ask you one last time, don't do this. Cancel the fight. Admit she's your daughter and try to build something real with her." "You know I can't do that." "Can't or won't?" Roberto met her eyes, the eyes of the woman who'd loved him when he was nothing, who'd believed in him when no one else would. "If I cancel now, I lose everything. My reputation, my money, my legacy. Charlotte leaves and takes half of what's left. I become a cautionary tale about a fighter who got old and weak. And if you don't cancel, I fight my own daughter on live television while the world watches." They stood in silence, the weight of 18 years pressing down between them. "She's incredible, Anne. Watching her train, seeing her fight, she's everything I was at that age, but better, hungrier, more focused." She had to be. She didn't have the luxury of coaches and managers and million-dollar training camps. She had to become great with nothing but will and talent. Roberto's voice cracked. "I want to be proud of her. I want to tell the world that she's my daughter, and I couldn't be more amazed by what she's become. But you're terrified she's going to destroy you. Aren't you?" Anne smiled, and for a moment, Roberto saw the woman he'd fallen in love with 2 decades ago. "Roberto, I've been waiting 18 years for our daughter to destroy you. It's going to be the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." As Anne turned to leave, Roberto called after her. "What should I tell her? If I get the chance, what should I say?" "Tell her you're sorry. Tell her you were wrong. Tell her that walking away from us was the biggest mistake of your life. And if she doesn't forgive me, then you'll know exactly how I felt in that locker room when you called me nobody." 5:33 a.m. Claressa's final preparation. Claressa stood in front of the mirror in her hotel room, shadowboxing with fluid precision. Her reflection moved like liquid violence, every combination perfect, every movement calculated for maximum destruction. Miguel had texted her fight instructions. "Remember everything we practiced. Stay disciplined. Don't let emotion override technique." Rosa had sent encouragement. "You got this, Hermana. You were born for this moment." But it was her mother's note that meant the most. "No matter what happens tomorrow, you are my champion, my pride, my greatest achievement. Fight with love, not hate. Show him what real strength looks like." Claressa folded the note and tucked it into her glove bag. Tomorrow, she would carry her mother's love into battle against her father's legacy. 8:45 a.m. Fight day morning. The sun rose over Las Vegas like a blood-orange promise of violence. News crews set up outside the MGM Grand. Fans began gathering in the casino lobbies. Betting windows opened with lines stretching around corners. Roberto ate breakfast alone in his suite, staring at eggs and coffee he couldn't taste. Charlotte had already left for her spa appointment, maintaining her perfect appearance for the cameras that would document either his greatest victory or his most devastating defeat. 3 floors below, Claressa ate oatmeal and fruit while reviewing fight footage one last time. Anne sat beside her, saying nothing, just being present for her daughter on the most important day of both their lives. Miguel arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, carrying the gloves Claressa would wear into battle. Custom-made, perfectly weighted, with a small picture of Anne tucked inside the left one. "Ready, mija?" "I've been ready for 18 years, coach." 11:27 a.m. Final preparations. The weigh-in was a formality. Both fighters made weight easily. The crowd screamed as they faced off one last time, father and daughter separated by 18 years of pain and an ocean of regret. Roberto, 6 feet 4 inches, 238 pounds of seasoned muscle and championship experience. Claressa, 5 feet 10 inches, 195 pounds of pure hunger and unbreakable will. They didn't speak during the stare-down. What was there to say? Everything that mattered would be settled in the ring. As they separated, Roberto caught Claressa's eye and mouthed 2 words: "I'm sorry." Claressa's response was a smile that chilled his blood. "You will be." 6:47 p.m. Pre-fight. The arena filled to capacity. Celebrities, politicians, and boxing legends filled the front rows. The energy was electric, dangerous, like the moment before lightning strikes. In his dressing room, Roberto sat in silence while his team prepared his hands. Eddie tried to give last-minute tactical advice, but Roberto heard nothing. His mind was locked on the moment when he would walk through those ropes to face the daughter he'd abandoned. 3 doors down, Claressa meditated in perfect stillness, while Miguel wrapped her hands with the reverence of a priest preparing communion. Each wrap was a prayer, each layer a promise that she would walk out of that ring as champion. "Remember," Miguel whispered, "this isn't about revenge. This is about justice. This is about proving that love is stronger than money, that loyalty matters more than fame." "I remember, coach. I remember everything." 7:54 p.m. The walk. The crowd erupted as Claressa emerged from the tunnel, walking toward the ring with the confidence of a queen claiming her throne. She wore simple black and gold, her mother's colors. Anne walked beside her, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter approach her destiny. Roberto's entrance was met with a mixture of cheers and boos. The crowd was split, half supporting the legend, half pulling for the daughter seeking justice. He wore his traditional white and gold, the colors of a champion who'd never lost when it mattered. As they climbed through the ropes, father and daughter stood in opposite corners of the ring that would determine both their fates. 8:02 p.m. Final moments. The referee called them to center ring for final instructions. They stood close enough to touch, close enough to see themselves reflected in each other's eyes. "I want a clean fight," the referee said. "Protect yourselves at all times. Touch gloves and come out fighting." They didn't touch gloves. They didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had been said 18 years ago in a locker room beneath Madison Square Garden. As they returned to their corners, the arena fell silent with anticipation. Claressa looked across the ring at her father, the man who'd given her life and then abandoned it, the legend she'd studied and now prepared to destroy. Roberto looked back at his daughter, the child he'd thrown away, the warrior who'd risen from nothing to threaten everything he'd built. The bell was about to ring, the storm was about to break, justice was about to be served. But in that moment before battle, both fighters carried the same thought. After tonight, everything changes. After tonight, the truth finally comes home. After tonight, one of them would stand as champion while the other faced the consequences of choices made 18 years ago. The crowd held its breath. The cameras focused. The world watched. And in the silence before thunder, father and daughter prepared to write the final chapter of a story that had begun with love and betrayal in equal measure. The bell was coming. The reckoning was here. And Roberto Langford was about to learn that some daughters never forgive. Some daughters never forget. Some daughters grow up to become everything their fathers feared they would be. The storm named Clarissa was about to make landfall, and nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 10. Blood in the Ring. Ding! The bell rang like a gunshot through the MGM Grand Arena, and 18 years of abandonment exploded into violence. Roberto came out fast, trying to end it early with the overwhelming aggression that had destroyed a generation of heavyweights. His first combination, jab, cross, hook, was thrown with championship precision. Clarissa moved like smoke. Every punch Roberto threw missed by millimeters, his fists cutting through air where his daughter had been a heartbeat before. The crowd gasped as Clarissa slipped under a devastating right hand and countered with a left hook that snapped Roberto's head sideways. First blood belonged to the daughter. "She's making him look foolish," the announcer screamed. "Langford can't touch her." Roberto pressed forward, his experience telling him to cut off the ring, to use his size and strength. But Clarissa had studied him too well. Every move he made, she'd already seen coming. Every pattern he fell into, she'd memorized and prepared to counter. By the end of round 1, Roberto's perfect record had its first crack. His right eye was swelling from 3 clean shots he'd never seen coming. Between rounds, "She's faster than we thought," Eddie told Roberto, working on the cut above his eye. "You need to take her head off early, or this gets ugly." Across the ring, Miguel was calm as stone. "Perfect, Mija. He's frustrated. Now take him apart piece by piece." Clarissa nodded, her breathing controlled, her eyes locked on Roberto like a predator watching wounded prey. Round 2. Roberto came out swinging with desperate fury, throwing bombs that would have flattened any other opponent. But Clarissa wasn't any other opponent. She was his daughter. She was his reckoning. She was everything he'd thrown away, grown strong and hungry for justice. Clarissa caught Roberto coming in with an uppercut that lifted him off his feet. The crowd erupted as the legendary champion staggered backward, his legs unsteady for the first time in his career. "Get up, Dad!" Clarissa shouted, her voice cutting through the arena noise. "That's all you got!" Roberto's blood ran cold. His daughter, the child he'd abandoned, was taunting him, breaking him down technically and emotionally with surgical precision. Round 3. Roberto rallied with the heart of a true champion, landing his first clean shots of the fight. A right cross opened a cut on Clarissa's cheek. A left hook to the body doubled her over. For a moment, experience and power seemed ready to overcome youth and hunger. But Clarissa smiled through the blood on her face. "Thank you," she said, just loud enough for Roberto to hear. "I wanted to know what it felt like to be hit by my father." Then she unleashed hell. A combination so fast and violent that the crowd went silent. Left hook, right cross, left uppercut, right overhand. Each punch landed with the accumulated pain of 18 years of abandonment. Roberto crumpled against the ropes, his eyes unfocused, his legendary defense shattered. Round 4. The massacre began in earnest. Clarissa stalked Roberto around the ring like a lioness hunting wounded prey. Every shot she threw was calculated for maximum damage, maximum humiliation. "Say my name!" she demanded, landing a right cross that sent Roberto's mouthguard flying into the crowd. "Say your daughter's name." Roberto could barely stand, his face a mask of blood and regret. But something in Claressa's voice, the pain behind the rage, made him remember the man he used to be. "Claressa," he whispered through split lips. "My daughter, Claressa." "Louder!" She hit him with another combination that echoed through the arena. "Let them all hear you!" "Claressa Johnson!" Roberto shouted, his voice carrying 18 years of guilt and amazement. "My daughter, my champion!" Round 5, the end. Claressa stopped attacking. She dropped her hands completely and stood in the center of the ring, her eyes locked on Roberto's battered face. "Hit me," she said. "What? You heard me. You want to be my father. You want to mean something to me? Then hit me. Hit your daughter as hard as you can." Roberto stared at this magnificent, terrible woman he'd created and abandoned. Blood streamed down her face, but her eyes burned with unbreakable will. "I can't. You already did. 18 years ago you hit me harder than any punch ever could." Roberto lowered his hands, tears mixing with blood on his cheeks. "I'm sorry. God forgive me, I'm so sorry." Claressa nodded once, then ended it. Her final combination was a work of art, poetry written in violence. Left hook to the body, right uppercut to the chin, left cross that sent Roberto crashing to the canvas. The referee began counting, but everyone knew it was over. Roberto Langford, undefeated heavyweight champion, $200 million Empire boxing legend, lay unconscious on the canvas while his abandoned daughter stood over him as the new champion of the world. The aftermath. As Roberto was helped to his corner, barely conscious, Claressa was handed the championship belt she dreamed of her entire life. But she didn't celebrate. Instead, she walked to Roberto's corner and knelt beside her father. "I forgive you," she whispered, her voice breaking with 18 years of pain finally finding release. "But I'll never forget what you chose over us." Roberto looked up at his daughter, his conqueror, his greatest achievement, his biggest regret, and managed one word: proud. Claressa stood, raised the championship belt above her head, and let 18 years of abandonment transform into the greatest victory in boxing history. The daughter Roberto Langford had thrown away, had grown up to take everything he'd built on that betrayal. Justice, finally, had come home. And in the most watched fight in boxing history, the world learned that some storms are born from abandonment. Some daughters never forget, and love, real love, is always stronger than money. The end.